Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the Drake Martinez podcast. I'm your host Drake, and today we're going to be getting into some current events. I know it's been a little while since you've heard from me. It's been about 45 days since my last episode, which was on September 11th, and some things happened in my personal life and in my professional life that have kind of been taking priority, but the podcast is up and running again, and in the future, make that more of a priority to not miss out on weekly episodes. So appreciate you guys for tuning in. I see that we got some new people tuning in from Russia, South America, pretty much all over the U.S. So that's really nice to see, and welcome to the podcast. So without further ado, let's get into the content for this week. Today, we're going to be talking about the hot topic, which is this conflict in Israel, and it's a pretty crazy one, especially as an active duty member. Seeing a situation that could spark into a regional conflict is concerning. But what I find actually the mainly concerning about this is the way that the world has been reacting. And it seems like a pretty cut and dry situation, at least from my point of view of what's happening in Israel right now. Just disclaimer: I have a longtime friend from Israel. He is, a guy that I would consider a brother from going back all the way to high school. We're not so close these days, but once you've been that close with somebody, and their family, you never lose that fondness and the affinity that you have for these people. And I know from what he's told me and just from logic and history's on the side of the Jews right now. And the sheer brutality and the butchery that the Hamas terrorists were committing in Israel, I think just tells you everything that you need to know about this conflict and the previous conflicts. So I have a rule as a student of history when it comes to territorial claims. I have a couple of rules that are tried and true in terms of history. The land is claimed by the owner, the winner of the war. Let's say if there's a land dispute, there's a war, and then the territory is acquired by the victors of the war. The way that you avoid that is you don't lose the war. Okay? So the other issue is who is indigenous. Okay, so indigenous peoples do have claims to the land. And in this case, both of those go to the Jews in Israel. And then the other issue is that a lot of people conflate this issue of land ownership with the genocidal psychopathy of Hamas terrorists. Now, I'm going to be straight up honest with you. I'm not an expert. I do know basic history. I do have a moral compass. And I can judge people by the fruits that they bear. And I can take historical accounts all into consideration and come up with my own conclusion. Given all of these things, I do not see how an intellectually honest person can walk away from what the situation over there and say that Israel's in the wrong or pretty much has ever been in the wrong. Okay? So let's take it issue by issue. And let's dissect it to get a clear understanding from my point of view. Territorial claims. For one, territorial claims belong to the Jews because they were there first. Simply put, they were there first. Now, if we go back to the era of Roman conquest of the region, it was called Judea because that was the land of the Jews. If you look into the Bible, that region, which is a historical document, was conquered by the Jews, by the Israelites, the people of Israel. They claimed the territory. They held it for many years. And then when you look into the Bible, the example given, I'm pretty sure it's like midway through Genesis, or the historical account that's given, is that the Jews left that land and went to Egypt because of a famine. And I don't remember which brother it was, but one of the brothers, maybe it was like a grandson of Isaac. I'm not really sure. I have to read it again. But essentially, he was given up by his brothers to slavery. And then over time, he becomes, I'm pretty sure it was Pharaoh of Egypt. And then the Jewish people have famine in their region, and then they go down to Egypt, get enslaved after a couple of generations or so. And then Moses leads them back into Israel after 40 years of wandering in the deserts and or the wilderness, as they say. And the land is claimed and occupied by them for generations. So let's go with a generous date. I'm not reading anything. I'm just going by off of my memory. Let's say they occupied the region 1500 BC. Okay, so that's 1,500 years before the birth of Christ, and then Jesus comes along, and that's the time of the Romans. Shortly thereafter, Judea is, destroyed essentially by the Romans, and maybe it's like 100 years later or somewhere around there. I'm not really sure, but of course after that, so let's just put a pin in that. Okay, so the indigenous people, check. Jews, they were there first. They had that territory for a very, very long period of time. Now, the next peoples of relevance is like the Palestinians or the Philistines. So that's where they got the name from the Romans, was their nemesis, I guess, or their enemies, the Philistines. And this sort of gets like mixed up with the Muslim peoples. And that's not a thing until Muhammad, I think, is like 600 AD, but I think it takes another 200 years or so from his birth until the caliphate is established and his generals start, taking over territory. So, okay, let's put a pin in, let's say like 1000 AD. So, a good 2,500 years or so, give or take, from a generous or a lowball estimate of like when the Jews occupied the region. Okay, cool. So now we're at a period of 1,000. There's different territorial claims. There's the Crusades. The Christians actually come in and occupy the area for a bit during the Crusades with, I think it was the Leper King. I don't remember, Edward the Fifth, maybe. I don't remember exactly. But there's, it's hotly contested during that time. And then you have World War I, World War II, and then you have but within there you have the Ottoman Empire, which is a Muslim Arab empire that stretches that whole region. And then once World War II is over, that region is occupied by the British, and the British take control, and they give a section of it to the Jews, and sections of it are carved off for the Arabs, like, for example, Jordan. There's lots of arbitrary carving up of territory there. And I had to read back on it, but that might have even happened during World War I. But for sure, that region lost its power because I think the Ottoman Empire was defeated at the end of World War I because they sided with the Axis powers, if I remember correctly. And then with World War II, that region, of course, sided with, we're talking about the Arabs, with Hitler. So any territory that was lost, because you lost the war. can't really feel sorry for you, especially for siding with Axis powers. Okay, moving on. So the British at that point, because victors of, the spoils go to the victors in terms of war when it comes to, especially when it comes to territory. Now that area is then distributed how they would like to see it. So they're the occupiers and the owners of the land at that point, and they're like, okay, here you go, Jews, you got some land, and then they carve up other areas, and then sort of arbitrarily name it like Jordan, etc. Okay, cool. Now, at that point, the Israelis, the Jewish people now have their own territory. So you got one Jewish nation versus, I think there's like 40 Muslim countries around there, give or take, in the world. Maybe not during that time, but approximately now there's around 40. Now, there's a couple of wars that then happen called, like, I think the 6 Days War and then the Yom Kippur War, both initiated by the Arab countries that surround Israel, and Israel won both, obviously, or else it would be gone. And that's sort of like the point of this. And fast forward to today, there are, if you look on the map, there are regions of that area of Israel where it's, if you go east of like Jerusalem, that's West Bank, that's Palestinian territory. And then you have the Gaza Strip, which is this little area that's being contested right now with Hamas. And it's being contested because of a situation that happened on October 7th, which, almost a month ago now, which was probably the most horrific thing I had ever heard of in my lifetime. Now, I've seen all sorts of barbarism in my lifetime. I've seen, the beheading of Daniel Pearl. I've seen, I didn't see it personally. I didn't look at the video, but I know that it happened. This is one of those things that I just don't want to see. Remember, there was a gentleman named Nick Berg, an American civilian contractor who was out in Iraq. He also got beheaded. And I think we as in the West conduct warfare when things like this happen for a number of reasons. One is to sort of maintain peace through deterrence, right? So if like you have a terrorist group, and a terrorist group is sort of hard to deal with because they're not like the representation of the country, per se, but they can be, like de facto, as is the case with Hamas. I mean, in this case, they are the governing body of Gaza. But in other situations, they can be the de facto or in place government of a country, and dealing with them is very different than dealing with another country. For example, they don't play by the rules, especially if in the case with Gaza. So, or in the case with the in Gaza with the Hamas terrorists, because it's well known that they use essentially like human shields. And it's something that like a Western country or even any other developed country around the world just wouldn't be able to utilize these sorts of tactics in warfare. So they use asymmetrical warfare as like not a word that you can even use for them. They use like just straight up cowardly tactics that just the aim is to get their own civilians killed so that they can get these sympathy points from the left and then get these calls for a ceasefire, which is just like a case of like, if I punch you in the face and then run into my house and you're like knocking on my door and I'm like, hey, let's just be friends, bro. I didn't, let's just call it even. And it's like, oh, you know what, man? Like, we're not even actually. You punched me in the face and then you ran into your house. And not only that, but you took my daughter with you. That sort of thing. That's what's essentially happening. It's like childish behavior, but like on a state level is what's going on over there. Because like children are nasty. They bully each other. They do all sorts of terrible things to each other and then pretend like they're little angels. And that's, I'm not saying like all kids are like that, but children have that tendency unless you like make them grow out of it. But But the West right now, especially the left, the suicidal left, has determined that this type of behavior is totally acceptable for some weird reason. You'd think that as soon as they heard the issue of women being raped in mass with their pro-feminism and all their garbage, that they would have some moral backbone and say, hey, you can't go in mass raping women across Israel and burning children alive. But I think that this has just revealed what we've all suspected about the American and Western left, which is they're suicidal. They hate themselves, and they hate the society in which they have lived and prospered, to the point that anything that brings it down is good. So they have like this topsy-turvy view of the world where anything that's good for the destruction of their lives, the West, Western values, morality in general, is good. It is the new good. And anything that will strengthen the West, strengthen their countries, their families, their own personal lives, they are not in favor of. They are vehemently against it. And this could not be more evident in the case of what just happened in Israel, where you have these psychopaths on drugs. Apparently they were on drugs too, using paragliders and hang gliders and flying in, mowing women and children down, raping women, burning children alive, doing these things in front of parents, in front of husbands, just the most horrific and terrible things that human beings can do to one another. I mean, at that point, I wouldn't be surprised to hear reports of flailing and scalping and just all the sorts of horrible things you also hear from civil wars in Africa, where mass rapings also happen with the purpose of infecting the other tribes or the other side with HIV. Mass amputations. It's just the most disgusting. War is bad enough. Okay? War is bad enough. But once you start going down this road of just depravity, it just really speaks to what your civilization is all about, unfortunately, for the Arab world. Now, I'm not saying the whole Arab world, but in this region, with this burning Jew hatred, these people who are okay with just murdering Christians, murdering Jews, their whole philosophy is the genocide of entire peoples. I mean, this is exactly and what's so ironic about this is the American left spends all this time bashing the American right wing conservatives. Now, I got my own bones to pick with them, and I'm probably going to go over that in my next episode. But do you ever notice that the word that they use, that they tend to use over and over again, is the Nazi, right? Now, I don't know what can get more Nazi than being okay with the extermination of the Jews, which is what they're all about right now. I mean, they're not even hiding it. They're not even sugarcoating it anymore. So I think that we've entered a new dark, really, really dark moment in our history. Not just because of wars. Wars have been going on for a long time. And even depravity like this has happened in the past. Raping and pillaging used to be the normal. Actually, in warfare, it happened. Mass rapings happened in World War II when the Soviets, were carving through as they moved west. That happened as they went through Germany. And, all sorts of terrible things happened on that front, and on the Eastern Front in World War II, on both sides. Germans against the Russians, and then going back, the Russians against the Germans. These things happen. And when they do, it creates generations and generations of distrust, animosity, and military rivalries that can take a very, very, very long time to heal, if ever. Now, what would motivate Hamas to do this? So, one is they know that they're going to get this cover from the New York Times. They're going to get this cover from the American universities. They're going to get this cover of moral equivalency of comparing. Well, they're living in an apartheid state, and of course, this is what you do when you live in an apartheid state. Okay, you show me a person who is, you show me the founding fathers or any other rebel group that established or pursued their own freedom that utilized these tactics. Go ahead, find one. You can't, because groups of people that led rebellions, that led to the establishments of states, like Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh, the founding fathers, American colonists, many other examples, they had to conduct warfare in such a way that, like I said, war is ugly, it's disgusting, and it's nasty. But this level of like evil just doesn't, that's not war. I don't know what you would even call it. It's like I guess the best word would be a death cult. And unfortunately, I think this is really sad. Is like this, but this is, in my opinion, and from the research that I've done, this is I guess a feature, not a bug, of Islam. Because of history. The only other group that we've seen in recent years that have utilized these tactics is ISIS. And that part of the world that takes Islam to the point where they take it so seriously that they actually follow in Muhammad's footsteps, they end up doing these kinds of things because the Quran shows them that they can. A basic level understanding of the Quran shows that Muhammad, if you want to get really deep about it, we could go into that too. But, basically Muhammad started off his career, or his whole, his whole vision was that the lineage of, this is actually very important for people to know. His whole vision was that the lineage of legacy from Abraham did not go the way of the Jews. It went the way of through Isaac, but through, because in the Bible, if you read the Bible, this is why it's actually really important to read the Bible. Not just for religious and getting closer to God kinds of ideas, but for the idea of just like understanding where these things come from. Is Abraham had two sons. Now in the Bible, Isaac is referred to as his first son, but technically it wasn't he wasn't his first son. His first son was Ishmael, and Ishmael was born from essentially, I'm pretty sure it was like Abraham's handmaiden. Oh no, his wife's handmaiden, Sarah. And but for whatever reason, I'm not really exactly sure, I don't really remember, but Ishmael is not really considered in the Bible as his first son. The legacy, the lineage of Abraham's covenant goes with Isaac and his children, which are the tribes of Israel. Now, Muhammad had a vision that wasn't the case, that they were the true lineage. Okay. What is the evidence of that? So we can see how people conduct themselves in war, especially right now in the 21st century when everyone can know about it. Everyone's got cell phones and can take pictures and all that kind of stuff. We know in history that the slave trade, that so many people have so many problems with, where it originated in Africa, or and so millions of Africans were enslaved and then moved around, North America, Europe, etc. But they're also moved about in the Middle East because the slave trade was started by the Arabs. It's actually called the Arab slave trade. Okay, and then they didn't have a population of black Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula because they actually turned them into eunuchs so that they wouldn't be able to reproduce and have their own children. Okay, so moving on from all these depraved things. Now, Muhammad's example is that he takes this revelation that he has, that allegedly an angel gave to him, but it sounds like more like a demon. And he takes this and he goes full on with it. Now, apparently he was illiterate, so he had to turn it into an oral tradition, which is why the Quran is so much shorter than the Bible and the Torah. And then it's made it more accessible for people who couldn't read. Now, there's Jewish settlements at this time all throughout the region, not just in like modern day Israel, but also in the Arabian Peninsula, Greece. The Bible is very actually clear about this, that there's Jewish cities all over that region, not just not just in Israel. So he goes to Jewish cities. I'm pretty sure it was Mecca and Medina, after only gaining a very small following, and he tries to pitch this religion around there, and it's not working. The Jews don't want to incorporate this, or they're not interested. Same with Christianity. No big surprise, whatever. Now, where Muhammad goes with this is he goes into the area of political violence. So he cuts their heads off, beheads them, and then he turns into a military leader, and led armies, killed, I think the estimate is around like 4,000 people or so. So he's a great example. He's the example that like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader from ISIS, the Taliban, Haqqani Network, all these guys point to, especially the hardcore Sunni and Shia, especially the Wahhabi sects, which is they take this example very, very seriously, and they believe in jihad. So okay, I understand where they're coming from. So when you understand all these things about Islam, who Muhammad was, what's actually preached, and what you have is not just a religion, but what you have is a social, political, and military lifestyle. It's all encompassing. It's not just like a separation of church and state like how we have in the West. That's not a thing in Arab countries, or rather in Muslim countries. And you can see that in a place like Turkey, for example. In Turkey, that used to be a pretty secular state. But as the world has become increasingly, and I say pretty, I mean like it's kind of like loosely, you could see that over the years they've become, especially after ISIS, that they have become increasingly Islamic and is like Islamic militant. They actually help support a lot of the oil trade that and purchasing from ISIS during the Syrian civil war. So the whole region's a mess, and I feel like I don't want to just go off on and complain without solutions. But the solutions that we had were, during the Trump era, the Abrahamic Accords, getting the Israelis and the Saudis to talk to each other, and then another thing that I want to touch up on is Lebanon. Lebanon used to be a Christian country. I'm pretty sure the ratio was back in the 70s was like 70-30. And then you had the Civil War. And then it became the other way around. And Christians are the most persecuted religion in the world. And it doesn't seem like a religion of tolerance and peace to me. Because they're not getting, persecuted by atheists. I mean, they are and they aren't, not to the level that the Muslims do it. But if you look in Africa, Asia, this region, the Middle East, I've seen it firsthand in Greece when I was there in 1997, because my mom's home island is really close to Turkey. So I've seen it firsthand. It just seems like there's one religion that is okay to be brash, open, in your face, and then gets no criticism from, scholar, like the alleged best thinkers in the West, and the others are like, hey, you know what? You can just die. We don't want you. And I think that gives a lot of validity to Judaism, Christianity. Actually, that's actually probably like wasn't one of the most important turning points for me. Was I started realizing as I got older and a little bit wiser, which is that a good rule of thumb is to just do the opposite of what the American media and the left and the the college professors and the universities tell you to do. That usually it tends to be that the exact opposite is the truth and the way that you should go. So, take that for what it's worth, but it's worked for me so far. I think it's made me a happier person. It's made me realize a lot of the lies and the way that they distort reality is terrible. So let's go back to this conflict and finish up on it. So you have the territorial disputes, and then you have this issue of like a military conflict. Okay. So military conflict, let's brush up on that a little bit. Now, we've already kind of talked about this, but a military conflict is not crossing a border, murdering children, raping women, burning people alive, and then thinking that you can just take hostages, go back into your territory, and then be like, hey, no hit backsies, no punchbacks, whatever childish stuff that children do. Punch you, but you can't punch me back. I called it. Oh yeah, we want a ceasefire. Yeah, of course you do. Of course you want a ceasefire. Now, there's one of two ways that Israel can deal with this. And a lot of it depends on if Hezbollah wants to get into the fight. So let's assume that they don't. Let's just go with the fact that they're just dealing with Hamas right now. They have to deal with Hamas so unequivocally, like powerfully, and leave no room for interpretation of like them being able to do this again. Because like if you have to think about it, man, like this isn't like some, like for us, all of our enemies are so far away. Like we've got, well, not anymore with the open border, but let's just go with like geography, right? Let's say we're having issues with North Korea, and North Korea is this ocean away from us. Cool. All right. That's not the case for the Arabs and for the Jewish people in Israel, right? Their enemies surround them. So that's a constant threat that they have to keep evaluating. And nothing's going to make you more on edge than just being right next to this group of people that literally want your entire people to be gone, wiped off the face of the earth. Okay? Yeah. So, like, it'd be like if your next door neighbor was like, hey, you know what? I really don't like you. Actually, it goes a lot further than that. I want to kill you, your dog, your wife, your kids, and then I'm going to go into your house, and then I'm going to steal everything, and then just, take all your money too. And, that's what I want to do to you. You imagine if your neighbor ever said that to you? Like, you'd be like, hey, either I'm moving or I'm going to take this guy out. He's just like constantly threatening you. Yeah, one of these days I'm going to murder you. I'm going to murder you and your. I mean, just in like let's say there's no police. You're going to handle that situation. There's no way you're going to let somebody just threaten you that lives right next door to you and be like, yeah, this is totally fine. This is exactly what I should be putting up with. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen for Israel. They're going to have to deal with the Gaza Strip, and they're going to have to deal with it permanently. Now, it's kind of sad because not everyone is an Islamic militant. And I think if a lot of them actually knew the inner workings of their religion, just like Scientology, like they would just be like, yeah, this is a cult, the death cult. I don't want anything to do with this. Sorry, but that's just the way that it is. Now, okay, moving forward, what is Israel going to have to do? I personally think that the best thing that they can do is level the Gaza Strip and turn it into a parking lot. And nobody lives there, neither Jews nor Arabs. And they should turn it into a memorial for what happened. And that's a sad thing, but what else can they really do? If they take the territory and then claim it as their own, well, now they're kind of like reaffirming all these fears and all these, unfair standards that people are, from across the world are holding them to. But if they just leave it be, then they're living right next door to psychopaths all over again that want them dead. And then after that, I think they can focus on what's going to happen in the West Bank, Golan Heights, potentially things that pop off with Hezbollah and Iran, and then work to improve their relationships with the Gulf states. But yeah, that's I think that there is really no other way for them to deal with the situation in Gaza other than to just completely destroy at least the function of Hezbollah in that area. I think that there's not a whole lot that they can do in terms of like its overall structure, aside from that, because they have such backing in Iran and they have a lot of their leadership in Qatar. But that's at least a good start. That's at least getting rid of that psychotic neighbor that keeps threatening you. Yeah, I think there's a lot of tensions that are boiling over in this area, and the next couple of weeks, next couple of months are going to really determine what the future of the world is going to look like. Because I really don't see how we can bounce back from something like this when there's such a like could you just, I don't know, for me it's like difficult to imagine back in 2001 people in America being like, yeah, dude, that dude Daniel Pearl totally deserved to be beheaded. Nick Berg, yeah, he had what was coming to him. It was a different world back then, and the crazy thing it was only 20 years ago. It was only 20 years ago. And look at the moral state of the world right now. Just so many people can't tell basic right from wrong. Even if you have a bone to pick with the Israelis in terms of territory. We're going to get into this other thing real quick, but that has to do with that. But even if you have a bone to pick with them, there's other ways to deal with that, and they have been open to dealing with that doesn't involve their annihilation. So let's go back to the Muslims. Let's go back to the way that they treat the rest of the world. So there's a church called Hagia Sophia. I think in the West, it'd be more like Hagia Sophia, but Hagia Sophia. It's one of the most important churches in the Eastern Orthodox Christian faith. Constantinople, which was like the center of the Eastern Orthodoxy. After the Ionian split, you had the Roman Empire, or the Holy Roman Empire, and like the Vatican on the western side, and then the Patriarchy and Constantinople as its center in the east side. And Hagia Sophia is one of the most important churches. Now, where is Constantinople today? Like I said, Istanbul. And you think the Muslims are letting Christians go there and pray and having territorial disputes over one of their most important holy sites? Nope. What about in the Temple Mount? You see any Christians fighting for land, even though that they always say, like, oh yeah, it's the site where all the three worlds religions have a claim to it. It actually seems like only one of them is fighting for the claim of it. The others had the territory for, as we already went over, millennia. And the Christians, last time that they stepped foot in there with any kind of claim was like a little over around 1,000 years ago with the Crusades. And then ever since then, it's been Muslims. So I think there's just so many things that are going to happen. But ideally, the best way for peace, I think, is that Palestine is just thrown out. And the Arab world takes them in, gives them citizenships in different countries. Israel occupies and controls the whole area. We back them up so that they have their territory, their people, their state, their security. And then Israel just has to make accommodations for Muslims to come in and travel if they want to go see the Temple Mount. And then they make some sort of, agreement that they're not going to do anything to the mosque or whatever. And I think that's like the best situation that anybody can hope for. Honestly, I think that, once Israel deals with Gaza, now they're going to have to deal with the West Bank. And that's going to be the next shoe to drop. So, but yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say about the situation over there right now. I know, like, a lot of people might consider it pretty harsh criticism of the Arab and Muslim world that I'm talking about right now. But I think everything that I said, I'm pretty sure, and if I made any inaccuracies, I'm more than welcome to be corrected, have a discussion about it. But pretty much everything that I said is from the heart, and it's not to criticize them from a point of view of, oh, I'm better than them. It's just because I think you just can't go around murdering people. Okay? There's wars. Understand. I'm in the military. I understand wars. I've studied military history quite a bit. I understand that wars kick off. And wars are never pretty. But this sort of like consolidation of political, religious, and social control that they utilize is, I think, really detrimental to the West. I think that their power is executed to the point that other religions, other groups of people are at the expense of them executing power and like the way that they utilize power. And it's been like that for a very, very long time. And I've seen a lot of evidence and a lot of conversations happening with a lot of Muslims leaving the faith once they learn about things like Muhammad being married to a 9-year-old. Once they learn about things like, the other certain religious aspects of it that I don't really want to get into right now, but essentially it'd be like monumental issues that they have that are within their faith alone, not just the practice of it, but issues in terms of like just core structure problems, the same way that like Scientology has these core structure problems, where like their belief system is just so ridiculous that the only explanation that makes sense for it to be binded is a cult mentality, which explains why there's so much control in every facet of life. Like I was saying, military, social, political. Yeah, I'd be happy to have more conversations about this with people. And again, I don't want to come off as harsh, but I think the only way that we're going to be able to move forward is if we speak honestly, and if we speak from the heart, say what's on our minds, and say exactly how we feel. Because there is a global concerted effort to move people into these neat little like funnels. Like, oh, it's such a tragedy. This is how I feel about it. Neither side is correct. I'm just going to go back to bed now. No, the issues are way more complex than that. The issues require a lot more conversation than just, oh, it's so bad. Yeah, just groups of people killing each other. And, I know a little bit about it, but whatever. I'm just going to just leave it for other people to figure out. Okay, cool. Leave it for other people to figure out. That's fine. But what you can't do is just say that, like, on a moral issue in terms of like slaughtering babies, that one side was justified in doing it for all sorts of reasons. We already fought a world war over this type of behavior. That is what's at stake. I think people need to remember that. So if we're just too PC and too afraid to like talk about these issues openly, then how are we going to fight it? How are we physically going to fight it if we can't even verbally fight it? The Arab world and the Muslim world needs to chill out. They already have 40 countries. They already have like 1.2 billion people. They're already like multiplying their birth rates like way more than the West. And we needed to get our heads wrapped around this issue of like what their religion actually is, what it entails, and is it even compatible with the West? And I'd say it's not. Japan already made that decision. And I think we have to also. It's not compatible. Maybe in the future it can be. Maybe the religion can be reformed. But from what I've seen is when people really understand who their main prophet was, then they abandon it. Some of them don't. Some of them, have like more theological disagreements and or arguments that and reasoning that I think is pretty flawed. But I think from what I've seen, a lot of them do. But anyways, we're going to wrap up today's episode. It's kind of a long and dreary one, but I appreciate you guys for checking out the Drake Martinez podcast. Next episode is going to be me griping about the Republicans, which should be a lot more lighthearted. All right, thanks guys. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to talk to you guys hear from you guys next week, and make sure to check out my new album. Well, it's not so new now, but it's the Fujiwara Effect by The Water Bear. You can find it on Spotify, pretty much anywhere where you can get podcasts, and like music. And then also check out me and my wife's podcast. It's called Engaging Walk. We talk a lot about marriage, relationships, and things like that. So definitely give that a check out right there. And then the website for a lot of the things that I'm doing is TitusFlamingoRecords.com. All right, love you guys. Thank you and have a great night.